Welcome to Two Girls with Grief podcast. We're your host. I'm Kendel,
And I'm Rachel.
the podcast where we talk about our experiences with grief. There might be tears or there might be laughter, but join us as we figure it out in real time.
We aren't professionals, we're just professional grievers. This podcast is for those dealing with grief, those who want to support those dealing with grief, and those who just want to learn. For any potential triggers, please check the episode show notes prior to listening. And without further ado, welcome to episode 6. Everything you've been taught about grief is wrong.
Hot tea. So let's dive into it. What is your credentials with grief and everything that you were taught about it not being correct?
Well, my credentials, as if you've been listening, people, I have lost my dad 10 years ago, my sister 8 years ago, and my mom 6 years ago. And so through that, I feel like I've been surrounded by grief. So that's a big part of it. Also,
Yeah.
you deal with every different type of people trying to support you or telling you what you should be doing with grief. You go through every, I feel like, supposed step of, how you process it, and even just the actual practical logistical things of it. Had to do it too many times, practicing it all and figuring out what do I actually want to do or I think is actually a good choice. And so yeah, my credentials is just a ton of grief. What about you,
A lot.
Kendall?
Well, I don't have as much as Rachel, but I think one thing that I was surprised to learn about grief is that it's ongoing. I think when people know that you lost somebody and they want to help, I think one of the first things they tell you is, oh, it'll take time. Yeah, you become more accustomed to living with grief day to day, but it doesn't. I think I'm learning kind of the sad reality is it's not going to go away. It kind of like lives with you and becomes a part of you. And I wish someone gave me that truth earlier on. I'm not sure if you had that same advice given to you or not.
Yeah, there's a ton of different advice. I think we're going to break down a bunch of them in this episode and kind of the things that we just hated to hear that weren't helpful. So, one of the things that were the first thing, so we're basically in this episode just going to go through a bunch of different things that you hear, a lot of the different normal cultural things that people think they're supposed to say when people are grieving, or even what you're taught that you're supposed to feel, and going through what we actually think about them and if we think they're actually helpful. So this is what this episode breakdown is going to be. So the first one that we're going to talk about is the 5 stages of grief and our thoughts on it. So Kendall, kick it off. What are your thoughts on the 5 stages of grief?
Yeah, I think for every person who has never lost somebody significant to them, and I think a lot of people have lost people in regards to friends or maybe people that they knew but weren't really close to. That is a very different world of grieving than someone really close to you in your life. And that is just a different hurdle entirely. And so when you're going through that really close loss, I think the thing that people always say is like trying to fit you into a box of where you are with your grief. And it's almost as if society, or maybe it's our Western culture, is trying to like speed up the grieving process, in which I think every griever out there recognizes like you can't speed that up. That is going to happen at its own time. But when people come and talk to you, whether it's at the funeral or they're asking you how you're doing afterwards, and they're trying to figure out which stage of grief you're in, and it's like, well, how am I supposed to know? I also don't know which stage of grief I'm in. So if you know where I'm at, like, you know something I don't. And I think it's an easy thing people fall back on, as if thinking that's like the magic bullet to heal grieving or to make the mourning suck less in the whole process. So yeah, that's my personal opinion about the stages of grief.
Yeah, I think for stages of grief, I think, I don't know if it's Western culture, but it makes you feel, maybe it's like solution oriented, where
Yeah.
it's if you go through the 5 stages of grief, then at the end you move on.
Yeah.
It's like, this was a
You're all
hurdle.
healed.
Yeah, this was an issue that you went through. We have labeled these 5 stages, and then you move on and you go back to your life. I think that's the hard part and the incorrect part of the 5 stages of grief. And I think you've mentioned it in previous episodes. It's that you'll be bouncing back. You're not just going through different stages and moving forward and then you're healed and you're a new person, you know, and you're back to normal. That's not a thing. So I think the 5 stages of grief, even though I think it could be helpful to maybe identify certain feelings or different things that you're, you know, just things you're feeling, or maybe the mindset, it's really not clear as the five
Yeah.
stages of grief, and you're not going to end up in like in a completed state where you move on from grief. So I think the 5 stages of grief is something that's pushed, but in the end can be just very confusing when you're trying to maybe read that and understand that to feel that you're going to be healed at the end, and that's just not the reality of grief.
Yeah, and I think,
Unfortunately.
yeah, 100% right. That with this mindset of the stages of grief, and I don't know if this is everywhere, but this is like the mindset I had around it was that, oh, by the end of the 5 stages, I am going to return back to who I was before all this. And that is a completely incorrect way of thinking about it, because going through loss and going through grief, you're chemically changing your mindset. You're not the same person anymore. And you and I have talked about this, but like, you're not only grieving the person you lost, but you're grieving the person you once were prior to that loss and the person you are now becoming, because you've had to adapt to really hard situations and really just profound emotions that, especially if it's your first time going through something like that, it is very drastic and it's traumatic, and you just don't know where all this pain somehow originates from within you. I'm not saying that it ever gets better with more loss, but it's kind of this mentality of like, you're not returning back to who you were at the beginning of this process. You're going to be a different person by the end of it.
Yeah, for sure. It's very complex and it can't be put into a box of 5 stages.
So, Rachel, like, you have experienced quite a loss from so many people in your family. So you've probably heard so many things from so many people telling you, how do you heal from all of this? And I know when I was just grieving initially from my dad, like, I heard so many things that just weren't helpful. I could tell they're coming from a good place and people are just trying to be helpful. But when you're hearing it as someone grieving, you're kind of like, great, like, this is not exactly what I wanted to hear right now. So, what are things like that you heard from people telling you? But then, what are things that also helped you when people said something and you were like, oh, that's actually supportive?
So I did grow up Catholic, and my mom, I think, moved toward Christianity as it got older. But
Mm-hmm.
so going through the very religious portion, or the religious viewpoint of just, you know, it was God's timing, it was God's will, you know, it's what's God wanted. Those type of things to me weren't really helpful at
Mm-hmm.
all, because I just I just don't see that as part of God's plan, or something that doesn't give me any peace.
Mm-hmm.
And I think things like that, you have to really know that that person is very religious in a place that is actually helpful. So I think
Yeah.
there are definitely people that appreciate that aspect and that belief and thinking in that way where it is helpful for people. I don't want to discount that that's not helpful for people
Mm-hmm.
that are that level of faith, but for people that aren't, I think that's where it makes it a big disconnect. When people tell you those things that, you know, it's God's will, all those different things that are very faith based, not helpful for me at the time. And not that I don't believe in God, I do consider myself a believer of something. But it makes it into a weird place where my mom especially wanted to move towards very religious, making everything feel okay. I think part of it was also she wanted me to be okay, and she also wasn't
Mm-hmm.
okay, and she was very much
Yeah.
leaning on faith to make everything okay, to understand, to even, I think, be okay with it herself, right?
Yeah.
To be okay with my daughter passed away, my other daughter's really sad, what it could be the reasoning for this. And I
Mm-hmm.
think for her, religion really helped her in a sense. But I think it also pushed us apart because it felt very cold to me and not our relationship at all prior to my sister passing away. So I think that was really hard. I think in general of people just expecting you to be okay or kind of questioning where you are with your grief, but in a very condescending way, also not
Mhm.
helpful. I think people don't understand exactly what you're feeling or what you're doing. Things that was hard for me that I'm not sure that I responded in the best way was people of kind of telling me how sad they were about my sister's death, but it's a hard line because I was taking it as, if I don't feel that you're close enough to my sister to be saying the things that you're saying and trauma dumping it on me when my sister just passed away, I think I was being very testy about it, where I'm like, I don't want to
Yeah.
talk to you, I don't want to hear it, I'm not gonna respond to it, this is inappropriate. Was it? I don't know. I think people respond to grief and death and shocking. I think it's more shocking because she was younger, but I had a hard time with people being very surprised and coming at me with their shock and surprise, that I was
Mhm.
very sensitive about it. And I would tell other
Yeah.
people, like, tell them not to talk to me right now, or tell them I'm not responding to people right now, because to me that felt very inappropriate. So now I'm not sure, but I think it's really
Yeah.
hard when it's something that just happens. You also have to protect yourself, but you're also
For
very
sure.
sensitive, and you're also more, I would say, like, combative. Like, things make you
Yeah.
angry, you can get set off about things way more easily than you would in a normal mental state. So I don't know if that, how other people deal with that, but I think some people could take that as, I don't know the right word, but basically, oh, you have that camaraderie, you both lost someone that's
Yeah.
important to you. But I know that in my head, if I felt maybe you weren't as close, or I know you didn't talk to them that often, why are you telling me how sad you are? In
Yeah.
like in so many terms. I don't know if that's fair or not, looking back, but I did in my head set that line. But I think things like that, and also just a ton of questions. The thing actually that I think of now is that I really didn't like was that people that I had maybe never spoken to, or maybe spoken to a couple times, reaching out to me, asking me what happened to my
Mm.
sister.
Yeah.
That is,
It's a little
I
insensitive.
don't, yeah, that was the worst one for me. And yeah, they would send their condolences, but it'd be also demanding what happened, because my sister was 29
Yeah.
at the time. And so, yeah, it was shocking. I don't think a lot of people know that she's going through a lot of health issues, but I felt it was very inappropriate to ask basically a stranger what happened, because you're
Mhm.
curious, because you don't always need
Yeah.
to know. You don't actually always need to know why someone passed away.
Yeah.
It's your curiosity, and I'm guilty of it too. Somebody's like, "Oh, how did someone actually pass away?" But sometimes you just don't
It's not
deserve to
owed to
know.
you.
It's not owed to you. Also, don't ask people that are heavily
The
grieving
closest to the person,
the
yeah.
tea. Like, don't ask them to divulge something.
And
Yeah, and I think that's so inappropriate, and I think that's a huge issue of the culture today. Everyone wants to know. Everyone feels like they're entitled to know, and you're not. You're not, and you can. I think there's people that are entitled to the knowledge, and I told people, and the people, they knew, but not everyone needs to know. Just because you knew the person doesn't mean you need to know exactly how they passed away.
yeah.
Just because it's shocking. And definitely don't reach out to people that you're not even close to and have a relation to and ask.
No, that's
So don't
totally
do that.
uncalled for.
And under the guise of, like, oh, I'm reaching out for support and, like, sending my condolences, but in
Mhm.
reality, they're trying to find the information. So those are
Yeah.
things of, like, support, but not really support. It's really self-serving. And things that actually helped were people just, I think, spending time with me,
Yeah.
and just sometimes sitting with me or keeping me busy. I think that was really helpful. I think I had a hard time asking people for what I needed because I didn't
Oh, me
know,
too. Yeah, I
especially
didn't
as
either.
people kept passing away. um, I didn't know what to do, and I had such a hard time with that, because it's like you don't know what you need, and you just feel sad, and you just feel
Yeah.
everything. So I mean, people that brought me food was really nice. People that just kept me busy, and not even just to talk about it, but just to spend time, and for me to
Take your
have
mind
something to
off
look forward
things.
to.
Yeah.
that was nice. Yeah, because your mind just circles, especially after my sister passed away. I just had so much time by myself where I felt like the
Yeah.
world was spinning, and I was just there, sad, and thinking no one cared about her as much as me, and no one's affected as much as me, and that's a hard place to be. After my mom passed away, my one of my sister's best friends actually bought me a ticket to Hawaii,
Oh,
and because she knows that the beach and the water is very healing and just very calming, and she bought me a ticket, and that was still probably one of the nicest things that someone's done for me. And I always get emotional thinking about it because it felt nice. Like my sister's friends care enough that
yeah.
they would do that, and like no questions asked. Just and I stayed with her, and I went to the beach, and that was really nice. So I don't think obviously everyone's willing or able to do something that nice of a gesture, but that was really nice because it's like,
But you can do things
especially,
like that on a smaller
yeah,
scale. Like, you don't
yeah,
have
on
to
a smaller
do
scale,
obviously, that's a grand, beautiful gesture, but
yeah,
people can do that on a
yeah.
smaller micro level.
Smaller things also work, but that was probably the nicest thing that
Oh,
someone like kind of grand gesture, and it was just nice because it's something that happens. Like you lose someone else, you also think, oh, I miss my sister, and so
yeah,
for her friend to offer something, but also something that like that she knew would help, and it did help,
yeah.
and it was nice to
And
kind of be away from everything.
to, like, recognize you're the little sister and
Yeah,
you've lost an older sibling, and I can't imagine how that would feel as the youngest and being like, I lost someone I've known my whole life, like,
yeah,
I've it's weird. I've lived a life before my sister was born after me, but she's never known a life without me in it, and that's
yeah.
it's a very interesting comparison when you think that's a really hard moment for her to
It is
recognize.
a
I
hard
I think
part.
that's huge.
Yeah. So it was really nice, and I'm still very close to them. I went to Hawaii earlier this year and spent time with them. So I think that kind of obviously that's a bigger scale, but that was definitely helpful to me and such a grand gesture that I'll always appreciate. But what about you? What are things that you felt supported and things that you hated for people that said to you?
Kind of the same thing with you. I had a more religious upbringing, and then with my father being sick, I have never prayed so much in my life for him to be better because same thing, he was also pretty young in his passing, and when he passed, it was also COVID. It was 2020, so that was a hard year. So everyone is already, is the world ending? Who knows? It's just like that year really rocked everything I believed in, and that alone was already a challenge for me to begin to reckon with in kind of this mentality of if how do I how can all this be shattered so quickly, and then how do I move forward without this like faith underneath me? And not to say like it's all gone, but it's just like I'm having to rethink a lot of things that I used to believe in. But my father also had a very Catholic funeral. I don't know if it's exactly the way I would have done it, but I do acknowledge it was needed for his brother and his sister for them to heal as well. Because I also recognize like I'm not the only person immediately affected by my father's passing. Like my aunt and my uncle just lost their baby sibling, and my dad was the youngest, and so I recognized that they were also having a really hard time as well with his passing and him being so young. And I will say, like, it was the immediate assumption that, like, I'm all well and good in my faith when people came and said things to me about death and dying. And it was kind of like, at the time in 2020, granted, 4 years ago, so I'm in a very different state, but at the time, I was like, that's the last thing I want to hear is about this is God's plan and this is God's timing. Cause I was just very angry and very hurt. And I will say reading a lot of books helped, like C.S. Lewis's A Grief Observed made me feel so much better about kind of those like really hurt feelings just in regard to faith and spirituality that I wasn't expecting to confront. But I wish someone had told me, hey, like this might be something that happens. Not only are you going to have to reevaluate your whole faith-based system, but you're also going to be grieving you and your father and everything else in your life. So I wish like people just didn't make assumptions like oh, you're such a good and happy Christian, when I didn't feel like that at the time. I felt like so much was crumbling underneath me, and I was kind of just really hurt and sad and angry. But I think with a lot of what you mentioned as well, one thing that really helped was I have two friends that constantly invited me to things. They made sure I was included. Even if I showed up crying and just distraught and like hadn't taken a shower in a week, like they still wanted me to be there, even in like my worst state. And of course, there was times where I didn't have the motivation to do anything, and like they were very understanding and kind, but it was like they still invited me to go have dinners with them or go do something with them. I recently reached out to them and said, y'all did so well with where I was. And same thing, I didn't know how to ask for help. I didn't even know what I needed at the time. And one of my friends, he was saying, I wish we could have done more. We just didn't know how to help you through that. And I was saying, y'all did everything I think you could have done. I couldn't have asked anything more from y'all. Um, Y'all invited me to things knowing that I might have been a Debbie Downer and still loved me and accepted me for that. And I don't think there's a lot of people out there in people's lives who, I think it's true when you lose somebody and you're grieving, you'll find out who your real people are. And
Definitely. Also, you grow a
yeah,
lot. So,
for sure. Yeah. And I haven't mentioned this yet, but you already know, like, I had a friend of mine had passed away recently. And it was amazing. Like now I recognize, oh, I need to do these things to make sure I can function and like keep going. And I need to ask for this stuff for help and know my limits. And I can communicate this now versus when a couple years ago, I didn't even know how to talk about that. I didn't even know how to bring that up. I felt like a burden all the time. I overextended myself too much. I think now I have gained skills and know the people who will actually step in and be there and be helpful.
yeah. I think one other thing we didn't mention here is often you ask someone, what do you need? I'll help you with
Mhm.
anything. And as you both mentioned, you don't really know what you need and you're not really thinking about that. Sometimes you're not
Yeah.
eating, sometimes you're not showering, sometimes you're in such a bad state. So I think when you get a ton of those questions, it puts a mental load that you already don't have to
Yeah,
take on
that's so
anything
true.
else. So I also seen other people say, just do the thing.
Mhm.
I know that someone sent you $5 for
Yeah.
coffee. Like things like that are nice, and it could be bringing them food, or maybe giving them an Uber Eats something. Just doing something that is nice. And I wish more people would have been just like, let's go for a day, let's go outside, let's do this or that, and just help me clear my head
Yeah.
because I wasn't asking for that, and those things were
Mhm.
helpful to me, but it was hard for me to even communicate what I was feeling and with just so much going on and so much loss. But I definitely think just providing something helpful without trying to put anything else on them is also kind of a key thing to think about when you're trying to support someone that's grieving, is that they may
Mhm.
not be able to communicate it, but obviously they need help. Even if they don't know they need help, they need help.
I remember, I think it literally, like, probably the day or the day after I found out my dad passed, I asked one of my friends because I was gonna have to go down for the weekend and, like, plan a funeral, and I was already like, "Well, who's gonna watch my cats?" So I was like, "I can't just leave my cats for a week." And a friend of mine just was like, "Don't worry about it. I've got it. I'll watch your cats." And she was so supportive, and she was there doing everything she could, the things that I didn't think of. And she's a very creative person, so she created this little shoebox, and it was decorated with like paper. It was kind of like the things where you could put donations in, I guess, or write a sweet thing in a box at the visitation or the celebration of life type of thing. She created this little box and it had pictures of my dad on it. And I don't know how the hell she found it, but she created this little box and gave it to me. And I was like, I didn't even think that's far in ahead. Like, I didn't even think about how am I going to collect, because I hadn't been to too many funerals in my life, so it's not things that I'm thinking about, but
Yeah.
she thought of that and she gave it to me, and I think even if I did use it, it was just a really kind gesture that she took time out of her day to make that. But even if I hypothetically didn't use it, it's still the fact that she put time and intention and found pictures and created this beautiful box, as like almost, and it was like a gift that kept on giving because I used it afterwards too, as like this little memorial thing to hold everything after his passing. And I don't know even what you categorize that as, but I didn't ask for that. I didn't even know I needed that. And she just did it and made it and gave it to me. And she's like, "Here, I thought you might need this." And I was like, "Oh, that is so awfully kind."
I think if you are a person that is capable of doing those things,
Mhm.
they're always appreciated.
Yeah.
And I think we've talked about just how people change and kind of doing things and doing favors or doing nice things is becoming not as popular anymore.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
I think when you're the person that needs it, you realize, wow, why aren't we the people that do that anymore? You know, it's such a
Yeah.
nice thing. So it's also something I'm working on too, where I'm not trying to just focus on convenience of things and think of the bigger picture and the type of person I want to be. So yeah, just be a kind person to someone grieving. So any way that you can be, do something nice for them, less questions, always check the faith thing. Faith is
Mhm.
great, but also know when people have it or don't, or if it even will be helpful for them. If they're even
Yeah.
going through a grief crisis, maybe that's not helpful to them at the time. And of course, nothing against religion. You're coming from a good place. It's not always received well. So I think you never want to say something that's going to make someone hurt more or angry in a hard
Yeah.
time. So just something to think about, no matter where you are in your faith or if you have faith or not. So just things to consider. So another thing that we think is wrong is the saying that time fixes everything, that time makes everything better. And that is just not true. In my experience, it's not at all. I had probably 8 years of grief where I feel not that I didn't have good moments or happy times, but it definitely didn't make anything better without doing
Yeah.
anything proactively for myself. So I definitely think that you have to be very proactive. 8 years can pass, and if you haven't done anything, or you haven't tried different things for yourself, or you haven't brought joy back into your life, or figured out what actually makes you healthy, what heals me, etc., you're going to be in the exact same spot that you were before. And time does nothing otherwise. The days
Yeah.
keep going on and it doesn't make anything feel better. I will cry about my sister the same amount I will today as the day I lost her. Same with my
Yeah.
parents. It doesn't make it easier that they're gone or been gone for a while. It's figuring out how to live a happy life without them here, and figuring out what how can I still have a good life without them here. And that takes a lot of different things. So for me, it's like
Yeah.
hobbies and building community and just trying other things, and now like things like this podcast and building community in the grief community, like stuff like that. That's very helpful. Finding more friends like you that that I feel like we get each other really well, and we could build like a great friendship for just like knowing each other for a few months and over kind of a very powerful experience in our lives. So I think that stuff like that is helpful, but just when people say that, I feel like they should eliminate that, because time doesn't heal anything. It's not time, it's what you do in that time. But what are
Yeah.
your thoughts on that saying?
Yeah, I think also to note that time is now operating differently for someone who's grieving than people just going about their day-to-day life and not going through immense grief. And I don't know how to explain it unless you go through it. That time somehow changes. It's like simultaneously, it's the longest days of your life, while also you look back and you're like, where did those days go? What did I do? How come a year went by and I feel like I just lost my dad a month ago? What happened? It's such a bizarre experience, and I think people who are friends with a griever, or you're related to them, or you're coworkers with them, to understand their brain is now just trying to cope with what is happening to them and trying to figure out how to survive this loss. And their brain is now computing time differently. I think like a month after my dad passed, I had this massive event for work, and I still look back and I don't know how I did it. I don't know what I did in that time to make that happen, but I think of like in a coworker sense of this understanding of they're not going to be that same energy or have that same delivery the way you expected prior to the loss. And just to have a little grace and understanding to that. Same things with like friends and I think family who are going through that. And you may not understand the magnitude of the grief that they're experiencing, but to just like have some margin for them to be late to things, or understand they're going to have lashes out about something that's irrational, because also grieving people are not rational anymore. Some people are very logical, and that's how they have to be to survive a traumatic situation. I was not a logical griever. I was irrational. It was emotional. I was like so far the extreme of what I usually am like. And fortunately, I had a lot of good people in my life who was like very forgiving and understanding and just knew she's just going through a lot, and to be patient with that and forgiving with that until I could find my way back to a normal personality that I usually am.
All of that just makes me think of the Taylor Swift song. I don't know if the title, but just the line "I can do it with a broken heart" is my mantra, because and I feel like grievers can all relate to that, because
Yeah.
your heart breaks when you lose these people, and it feels like I can actually feel that in my, like, sometimes when I think about it, it's just like this buildup, and it's like actual pain, like it actually feels like your
Yeah.
heart's breaking. And that line is very much, I feel like, my mantra now. I could do with a broken heart, because you are just trying to live and trying to, I would say you're trying to thrive, or hopefully people are trying to thrive and live a good life,
Yeah.
but you're doing it all with a broken heart. You're doing it all with kind of this, what's that? I feel like that term in golf where, I don't know golf, but it's there's a term with golf. It's like depending on your skill level, it's your, I don't remember what it is.
I
I
also
don't
don't play golf, and we're sorry to the golfers out there.
I forgot what it's called. But basically, it's like you start at whatever, there's some type of disadvantage or something. It kind of evens out the playing field,
Mm, yeah.
and I think of that with life. It's like you're kind of at this uneven thing, and just the daily function, because you're dealing with this pain and all this different stuff, and then you try to function. So you're doing all the broken heart, but you're kind
Yeah.
of at this place that it's harder to do, because different sadness, you're always carrying that with you. So I definitely think that song, I don't know, I know Taylor Swift was more about romance in her song, but I think grievers can all relate to that line of that you're doing it with you're live with a broken heart and trying to function.
Yeah. While the world is also expecting you to be happy and in your normal self at the same
Yeah,
time. So
to be
she's
over
like,
it.
every day I'm having to act like it's my birthday when she's
Yeah.
on tour. And she's like, I'm literally going through a heartbreak and a breakup right now, but I can't let anybody know. I felt that a lot too with grief. It was like you show up to work and you have to be, on your A game and everything. But that's like, damn, one person asked me how I was doing and immediate tears.
And sometimes that happens. Sometimes it's fine, and then sometimes that you don't even realize that you're just barely keeping it together
Yeah. Yeah,
for
you
that
don't
day.
realize it.
Yeah.
You're literally on the edge and you're like, you think you're doing well until somebody asks, and then it's just floodgates.
Yeah, I remember that at my mom's funeral, actually, she, people kept asking me that question, and I was able to keep my composure. And then one of my aunts that I'm really close to, that she lived with us for a point of time, very close, she asked me that. And that she was the one that I felt close enough, and it triggered me to just start crying. And the
Yeah.
first person that got me to cry at the funeral. And so you just never know. And sometimes you need to be with someone that you feel comfortable releasing that emotion to, or that you feel like understands the amount of pain that you feel from that. And I just remember, I got asked that question probably 30 times before my that particular aunt asked me, but it's when she asked me and she looked at me, I actually felt seen in that question. And
Yeah.
then I just completely blew up. Like completely blew
Yeah.
up in tears. Not mad at her, but just erupted with all the built up sadness of
Yeah.
it.
So, did everybody in your family who passed have a funeral, or what was your experience with that?
Yes. So I hate funerals. And actually,
Me
a
too.
random fact is that, which is our other topic, funerals is on the next topic, but is that all of my family members passed away while they're in the Philippines. So my
Okay.
dad had moved back in high school. My sister had moved there because she was not doing that well. So she moved to like spend some time with my mom in the Philippines. So she was
Mhm.
like kind of living there at the time. And so they all passed away while they were there. So we had two funerals for each person. So there's a funeral in the Philippines and there's a funeral in the US for everybody. I attended the
Oh,
two
that's hard.
funerals. Yeah. And I attended the funerals for my dad and my sister in the Philippines. I did not attend the one in my mom's. And the ones in the Philippines, also I'm 75% Filipino, 25% Irish, but I'd say more culturally Filipino, but also I'm not
Mhm.
growing up in the Philippines Filipino. So the culture was still very different for me, and
Yeah.
just the different traditions were different for me. And also, there's a lot of people that I don't really know that go to these funerals. It could be distant family, friends, different people that I didn't really know. So they always felt it just felt weird because I also don't like that on funerals you're kind of on display.
Yeah.
You're getting a lot of attention during a sad time, but it's even more so when I think it's more distant people, and also I think potentially I think it's an Asian culture where they ask those questions that you feel very uncomfortable about, and
Mm.
it's normal for them to ask that, and not normal for me, and then it makes it even more of a difficult situation. So I really hated those funerals the most because it just felt very foreign. It felt very weird. I didn't like it. And then for my dad, we also had a funeral in San Diego, which I it's really hard to bring ashes to the US from the Philippines, but his family really, like his siblings really wanted to have a funeral in the US. That one was
Mhm.
nice because he was in the military, so it was like a military funeral. I think he would have
Oh,
liked
yeah.
that. Although one of my aunts, I don't call her an aunt anymore, but she did go up at the funeral, basically blamed my dad's death on my siblings and my mom. So that was great. I think it also brings out the worst in some people. I
Mm.
get that maybe she was grieving in her own way, but very inappropriate. I don't consider her family anymore after that. I had to go up to speak about my dad, which I wasn't planning to, because I get that you want to honor somebody, but at the same time, it's really hard and really uncomfortable to speak in front of people
Yeah.
and share, even like, what do you say about losing someone so important to you? There's no words that I could really use to even say that. So basically, she forced me to go up there and denounce everything she said and just clear up all these different
Yeah.
things. Like, how are you going to blame my dad's death when he had health issues and depression on his kids and his ex-wife? It just so inappropriate. My sister funeral in the Philippines, I hated too. And then, but we did have a celebration of life back in San Francisco, and that was actually, as far as any type of funeral thing would go, that was really nice. She had so many people show up for her. So many people loved her. It was great. So I think that should actually how you should celebrate,
Yeah.
because there was good stories. Everyone brought food for her from different parts of the country, and
Oh, I
her
love
favorite
that.
foods. It was really nice. It felt very something that she would enjoy, and people just sharing stories about her, and her being very loved. So that was great because I feel like it was celebrating her life. My mom's funeral in the Philippines I didn't go to because I didn't want to see her passed away. And that's part
Yeah.
of the reason why I don't like funerals, that I think we need to question, do we actually need to have open caskets? Do we actually have to do that? I did not
Yeah.
like seeing my sister like that, or my dad. I refuse to see my mom like that because I have those images in my head, and I
Yeah.
refused to do that for my mom because I saw her sick already. I couldn't handle that. Like, I can't handle seeing another family member passed away, and I have that choice. And I also just was very uncomfortable at the wedding, at the funerals in the Philippines, just because there's different customs and stuff. It didn't
Yeah.
feel comfortable to me, so I didn't go. And I'm sure some people judge me for that, but I'm a human and I don't want to see my mom like that.
Oh.
I still feel very good about not doing that. She did have a funeral in the US that I was at, but I think we should question how we do funerals because it just feels very sad, and it's already a sad thing. So I think funerals need a revamp for sure. And I don't think everyone needs to look at someone's passed away body, to be honest. Like, I didn't need to see my mom like that. And I'm good that I didn't see her like that because I don't want to. I just don't want that image in my
Yeah.
head. So I think that funerals suck right now, currently, in the current model. They're also super expensive. And I think we need to figure out a way that is different. I still don't think about future funerals, but I think we need to question if funerals now and the current model are what we should be doing and how we should be I think if we're questioning how people grieve, questioning what's the actual process, what's realistic about grief, how do people actually function through grief, we should also question, do funerals suck? Yes. What can we change about them to make them at least a little bit better or celebrating their life a bit more? I think that we need to figure that out because I think they suck currently. But what are your thoughts
Yeah.
on funerals?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think I was told funerals are really healing, and I was expecting this soothing piece about funerals that did not ever happen. My father also had an open casket, and that was, yeah, there's something very bizarre about seeing somebody you love in this
State.
state. It's weird because like they look like them, but there's something like you as a human who's living can recognize like there's. It's weird to look at some a corpse that is not alive. Like obviously it was my father's body, but didn't like look like him necessarily. It was just very odd because obviously a mortician has to do a lot of stuff on the back end, and this is no knock to the craft of having to make a corpse
Yeah.
look human like because I imagine that's a whole lot, and that's no knock to it. It was just, I'm sure for some people in their belief system, like that was what they needed to heal. But for me, I now have an image of my father looking like a mannequin in a casket, and I have nightmares about it. I think same thing. I think I would have been fine without that whole experience.
It's
Having
not
to
needed.
go through
Yeah.
it wasn't needed at all. It's weird. It's has stuck with me in a weird way. Everywhere you read or see on TV, it's like, no, this is healing. You need to see the body. And I'm like, I don't think
Do
I need
you?
to.
Do you?
Do
Yeah.
you?
I
Like,
think of just the walking down the procession to
yeah.
see,
For
it
your
feels
life is
wrong.
walking down
Yeah.
the aisles. Yeah.
Looking into a coffin, it's so much more morbid for already a
Yeah.
completely morbid situation. It reminded me that the makeup that they did on my sister in the Philippines was horrendous.
Oh no. Oh,
So
that's
she did.
awful.
It just made it even worse to see that her
Yeah.
makeup was horrible. It just makes it even worse. That image, please take it out of my brain. It was horrible. Did you have anything else? Sorry, I cut you off a little bit. Enough of that.
No, I think other things is like, if you are having to plan a funeral, you're not going to make everybody happy. People are going to have
Oh,
comments on why you did things. And if you're not okay with making people upset, that's going to be, it was hard for me for people to be like, well, why did you do it this way? And I have to be like, sorry, this is the first funeral I've ever had to plan in my life. And I don't know
yeah.
what I'm doing. And I'm having to do it while being deeply distraught about this. So
Yeah.
I'm just a
Sorry,
girl
just
doing my
planning my
best.
just planning my dead dad's funeral. No big deal.
Yeah. And then you come to me asking me why I did this or why I did that. I don't know. I'm just going with it, you know? And fortunately, my dad was very easygoing and relaxed and chill. In fact, he didn't have anything left behind. I think in his perfect world, he rather would have been cremated because it was a cheaper option than the whole thing of having like the casket and everything you have to do to pay for a funeral. Like I said, like it's what my aunt and uncle preferred, and I recognize like that's what they needed for their healing. But I kept coming back to, is this what my dad would have wanted? And I think my dad just wouldn't have cared. But if you knew the person you lost and you're like, they would have hated this, like that would have been heavy on my conscience for the rest of my life to be like, I planned a celebration of life or a funeral for them that they would have hated. It's just
Yeah.
odd.
Yeah.
So you're not
I
going to make
mean,
everybody happy with that.
no. Now, I mean, now you can. There's options that you can have someone's body be turned into soil, basically, and you can do that. I've also seen that. I don't know if it's in the U.S. or it's abroad, but you can be turned into a tree pod. I
Mhm.
think that's a great option. You can also turn ashes into rings and jewelry. That's
Uh-huh.
also, I feel, a great option. So there's new options where people are mixing it up with how the traditional thing is. It's so much money for something
Yeah.
that I feel that majority of people hate. It's if not a good experience, why are you spending 25-30 grand on a horrible experience?
Yeah. And
Don't
it's a very
don't do it.
Christian way of honoring the dead. And if you're not already a Christian, like if Christianity is not a big aspect of your life, or if it's not a part of your life whatsoever, but that's the system we primarily have in the US, it's hard to find other avenues to honor your dead if you have other religious beliefs or if you have different spiritual avenues. It's an alternative, but it's not a prevalent alternative. I think you don't find that as often. And maybe in California you do, but definitely not in Texas. It's very much a similar type of funeral memorial type style.
Not that I know of, but now I'm out of the funeral grave. Hopefully, if you're knock on wood for the longest time of the business, I've stepped away from all the funerals. So
Yeah.
hopefully, God, let that be the next startup. Someone figure out how to celebrate people's lives differently instead
Yeah.
of this sad
Yeah.
procession, because it's sad already. Let's celebrate their life. Let's do something different. I
Yeah.
definitely feel like we caved in too much to so many different comments and suggestions. And what I realized is so many people, I no longer accept your suggestion if you're not willing to help. You want to do this thing that adds more work, you're not willing to help. So don't give your suggestion, because especially when we're kids trying to figure out our parents, there's so much stuff going on and you're just trying to pile on, but you're not actually willing to help, then step away. Don't bother me with your thoughts of grandeur that you're not willing to help with. Just back away. That's my end thoughts on funerals. Let's change the system. So another thing that people actually, I don't think, talk about enough and is very difficult and also not accounted for in terms of bereavement time is logistical grief. And that is just everything, it's a paperwork of it all, but it's also cleaning out their spaces, bank accounts, obviously the funeral planning and all that stuff, but taxes. There's so many different things that need to happen after someone passes away. And most people think, and corporate thinks, that you can take 3 days to actually sort any of that out. And there's so much to do, not to mention the emotional toll. Imagine having to clear out people's rooms, houses, etc., and you're not given actual time. They're like, oh, you can use your PTO. Yes, I want to use all my free time, my actual time for vacation, to use it for someone that passed away. You don't even have time to function in 3 days, and then they want you back at work, and that's standard. It's just not talked about enough. How much work it actually takes when someone passes away, the load of that all, it's just very unclear. It's very difficult. It's just so much different stuff, and you need all this paperwork and everything. Everywhere you go, they're like, proof of death, proof of death. That alone is very jarring when you just lost someone and you're just collecting these death papers, showing it to all these people so that you can close accounts, do all this stuff. You're walking around with just death certificates everywhere, requesting it, handing it out, and it's crazy. That takes just a mental toll alone, not to mention all other stuff. But I know that you did a lot more logistical stuff for your dad's passing. So what do you feel that was misunderstood or you wish people knew more about from handling all of that?
Talk about someone who wasn't ready to die. They were so young and had not had any of this planned. And I didn't have like passwords to anything. I didn't know how to get into any accounts to cancel them. So everything I'm doing is by mail or by phone call. And the biggest advice to anybody who's the executor of the estate, or if you were the power of attorney on things, get so many extra death certificates, because you'll be surprised how many you will be sending out. And it's weird because I feel like certain companies don't need an official death certificate, but then they're like, oh no, we need an official death certificate. And I'm like, you can't have a copy? Why? These things are like gold right now. I'm running out of copies.
Why do they need that? I don't understand why they need the actual.
Know.
And those aren't cheap, at least in California. I think they're like $15, $20 or $30. It's so expensive to die. My God.
It is so expensive to die. If you're not prepared to die and you don't have anything lined up, granted, there are people who I think are really organized and they have all their shit planned before they die. And it's like, okay, here's all the things that I have accounts to, and here's all the things you got to cancel. And God bless those people for making it easier on whoever's having to deal with their life afterwards. But my dad was not in that position. And so I'd be getting like collector debt notices afterwards being like, this account has not been paid for. I didn't even know this account even existed, much less. So me having to figure all that out. And then I think for about 2 to 3 years after his passing, I was still getting phone calls, emails of people being like, hi, we're trying to reach Mr. Rogers, and me being like, he's not here. What do you want? Because it's so sad to like be living your little life, trying to be better and healing on an emotional side for you personally. And then you get a call from a random number, and then you answer it, and they're like, "Hi, we've been trying to get in touch with so and so," and you're like, "Well, he's dead. Sorry to break the news to you." But then it's always, "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Anyways, we have all this stuff that we need to do." I appreciate the sympathy and concern. Like, clearly you really cared.
It's all business. It's all
Yeah,
business.
business first. And I think that was really disheartening to me, that you then realize that life is just like a number and an income to something, and it's not really about the personalness of, like, there's now one less person on this planet and all the people that know that person is now affected, but you're worried about the bill for something, and nobody teaches you how to handle this stuff. I think my dad was in a position of privilege, in a sense that he had some savings that I could pay for his medical bills with. But I did not know until way after, and then watching TikTok, that you're supposed to go back and correct things if you think they're wrong on medical bills. And I think about the amount of money I just blew because I didn't know what to ask from medical or from hospitals or doctors. And I'm thinking about all the people out there that don't know that and being taken advantage of by the healthcare system because they try to put extra charges on there because of the insurance and stuff. And it's really just disheartening that people will try to take advantage of someone in a precarious medical state, or, you know, as they're dying. People are still at the very last minute trying to, like, get money out of you. Like, it's really disheartening.
It's really crazy. I mean, even my dad, he had help in the Philippines, and we found out that his help was basically stealing from him. My dad was very trusting, and we found out they were supposed to be paying his bills. They didn't. They were just taking all of his money. And so beyond him passing away, we get there. He has no money in his account, and we find out that none of his bills have been paid for 2 months.
Oh my God.
So he owes money on everything, and we're in a foreign country. My brother kind of spoke the language, but not really. It's just very traumatic, and you're just trying to deal with to clean out his house, all this different stuff, and then you find out someone freaking cheated on him. And my dad was so generous, and it's like, I know my dad helped you and, you know, was supportive, and you still took advantage of someone that was sick. And I mean, I only found out he wasn't doing well because I sent family there, because his help was not letting me talk to him on the phone, and they kept answering his phone.
Oh,
and
weird.
So I made some family go check on him, and then he got rushed to the hospital, and it's hard to figure out from across the world. But then I just finding out that they were that evil, you know, that he loved them and he was really generous with them, and they took advantage of him and when he really wasn't doing well. And I just remember I sent a text to her and basically said, I'm sending the military after you, because my dad was in the Navy. So I was like, I'm sending the US military after you. You better run and hide. I will find you.
US military.
I hope my dad's ghost is haunting her ass and her family.
Energy.
Why do people take advantage? Someone's sick and not doing well, and you're going to take advantage of them and make things even harder. Everything is like, you owe this, you owe that. You're trying to just process everything. It's like, people, just be good human beings. Yeah. Otherwise, I will find someone. I will Liam Neeson.
She will send the military on you.
I will do it. I will figure out. Now I will send my family ghosts after you. I don't know how. I will do it. I will figure it out.
She's got a clan of them too, so I'd watch out.
I have a lot. I'm collecting them, so be careful.
You're already so emotionally uprooted, and that's such a huge thing you're trying to deal with already, like how profoundly sad you are. And then on top of that, this little stuff that you're like, why am I dealing with this? Why am I having to deal with all these bills and all this crap when someone just died? I should be focused on that. You don't have the motivation. I certainly didn't. So the last thing I wanted to do was go through the pile of mail of my father's bills. Gotta pay all this. And then my parents are divorced. And so having to be like, hi, I'm his daughter. I'm trying to get whatever this is done. And then being like, sorry, you don't have like the accessibility or the right to do that. And I having to be like, are you kidding? Like, my mom is not in the picture. Like, she can't do this. Like, if you want this stuff to get done, it's going to have to be me. Like, and you having to like prove over and over again that like you're the daughter, dead. Like you're allowed to be doing it. Yeah. And then they're dead. I can't have them call you up and be like, yeah, Kendall's my daughter. She's trustworthy. I promise. It's like, sorry.
Do you want me to figure that out?
It's just such a nightmare on top of
Yeah.
that. Eventually, because I have the same last name as my dad, they just assumed either I was his wife or something, and sometimes that was just easier to do and deal with than them having to be like, "Well, sorry, you're his daughter, so you can't do this stuff because you don't have the access."
Yeah.
The system is messed up. The system doesn't it's not conducive to anybody.
No.
It's not helpful. You can't get anything done. It truly is a nightmare. It's a nightmare to deal with. It was a whole nother set of grief I had to deal with. And like, on top of that, being angry at my dad, he should have saved his password
Yeah.
somewhere so I could look it up when he passed away rather than me
Yeah.
having to forget my password 47 times.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ugh. I think with all that, though, to be said is you go through so much of that like, profound sadness, even in all different various types of grief. And then you're hoping at some point you're going to get happy again. You're looking for the day that you start feeling better. And then those days eventually finally do start appearing again. And then you're like, these aren't the same type of happy days I had before the loss. Like, these are now sad, happy days, you know? And I'm sure like you have so many experiences of that, of trying to find those happy moments, but then it coexist with these sad times.
Yeah, I think there's so much with grief that people think that there's the end of the line and then you're better. But the truth is, you can easily laugh as you can cry. And sometimes you laugh and then you cry. I think a lot of times it's like something happened, like recognition of something or promotion or just anything good. And then you immediately think, oh, this is, you're happy. And then you think, oh, who would I
Yeah.
want to tell? And then that's the part I think that it makes it sad.
Yeah.
Happiness, and then you want to share it with people that are no longer here, or just even, if you are just already sad about anything else, it's like people that you want to talk to are gone, or you
Yeah.
want to share with them and you want them here. And I think that's the hard part, is you can easily be sadness as quickly as you can hit happiness. And it's hard. I don't know if it's possible to feel that level of happiness anymore, because
Hmm.
the the sadness is just right there,
Yeah.
because it feels different, because the people, your support system has changed, or, and it's not that you can't be happy, but it's like layered, it's just, it's like it's intertwined, and it keeps circling together. And it's very, I feel like it's just very intertwined,
Hmm.
and it just makes it harder, where I think it's like, when I'm not going to be sad anymore is really the thing. And it's like you're always going to have that sadness with you. And that's the hard
Yeah.
part, because you have to find more happiness so that you're just not sad. And I think that's the hard, it's like you have to be so proactive to not be sad about grief. You really have to be filling your life with stuff. And I think that's what often gets lost, is that you think that there's an end date, and it's just not. It's like you still can live a good life, but it's more of a challenge every day, just because you could also easily be consumed with grief. You could wake up feeling weird about it. You could have a weird dream. Like the day that I woke up with my sister hugging me, and I woke up still feeling that hug. It was so nice to feel that, but I was just in a weird mood the entire day, because it also just makes
Yeah.
it so real, right? So it was like a happy thing, and then also sad, because you feel like, oh, she's still somehow with me and around, but then it just feels so real. Oh, she's gone, and that sucks. And that's just kind of that feeling that I think is forever. I see people post a lot too. When will I no longer be sad? I hate to break it to you, it's always going to be there. You just have to find the balance that you're still functioning, can bring happiness and still be excited for things, and still enjoy your life. It's just a different than it was before. But what are your feelings on that?
I don't know who told me this, but it gave me a good sense of how long this was actually going to take, because I think in a lot of things that you read and a lot of things people say is after you lose somebody, oh, you're going to go through the 5 stages of grief in a year. And you and I both know that's not true. Someone told me kind of in the same lines, but they were like, you're probably going to be very deeply profound for 3 years at least. And I was like, 3 years? That's a long time. But this would be the 3rd year, and I'm not saying that it's prescriptive and that it's going to work for everybody, but it gave me a realistic timeline of like, I'm going to be really sad for a really long time before I start feeling myself again and start looking at the future again rather than looking at the past. And it's weird because I'm sure you've come across milestones that you're sad to come across milestones because you're like, man, this is an exciting moment and I'm proud, but I wish and my family there to be proud of me. And I'm having that moment because I started my master's program in 2021. I'm not sure if I said that story before, but my sister applied. She was just like, why not? If I'm going to get a degree, like now is kind of the only time to do it. And she just did it. And I think a little bit of like losing our dad kind of put a sense of life is short and you kind of have to live life and do the things you want to do now before it's too late. So I was like, okay, I like if my sister's going to do it, I'm going to try too. And 3 years ago, I started the program and I'm graduating this December. And everyone's like, oh, are you going to go to the graduation? And I'm like, I don't think so. Because it's not going to be happy for me. Like, I know it's a happy occasion and I should be really proud of myself. And I am. But just that ceremony, seeing all these people with their families, taking pictures, feeling so happy, like I wouldn't feel that. It's something I wish my dad was there to be like, you did it, kiddo. Like, I'm so proud. And knowing that I won't have that makes me just like, I don't need to partake in that. That's not going to be good for my heart. You know, I'll happily
Yeah.
take the degree in the mail and I'll move on with my life and figure out what I want to do next. But it's one of those things where I recognize like not to go to something for the sake of happiness if I know it's going to make me sadder. And a lot of people who haven't lost someone, it's very hard for them to understand why I don't want to go. They're like, well, you should want to go. Like, this is a thing you should feel so proud of. And I'm like, I am, but I'm also going to have to watch all these people taking pictures with their families and smiling and grinning and feeling so proud. And that's something I'm not going to have in that situation. So I'd rather just not stand there
Yeah.
awkwardly like a loner being like, someone want to take a picture with me and my degree?
Yeah. I think it's also hard sometimes to figure out what actually want to stand up with your decision and people to
Yeah.
understand it. I think also something is it's sometimes hard to figure out what is the right decision. Sometimes I'll think about
Yeah.
something like, oh, I really didn't want to go to that, or I'll build it up like, oh, it'll be really sad, or and sometimes it's like I'll go and I'm like, oh, it actually was nice, or this was
Yeah.
actually something I needed. And I think sometimes it's hard to figure that out. But also at the end of the day, it's your decision to decide what you feel is right,
Mhm.
and people need to respect that. But I do have a hard time sometimes figuring out, is this in my head that it won't be good,
Right.
or is it something that actually good? But I do think for bigger things like graduations, I think that's hard. It's like you want to give yourself your flowers, but at the same time, it's a harder thing when it's bigger,
Yeah.
monumental things to find that balance and be like, what actually is okay with me. Hey guys, turns out we had a lot to say about everything you've been taught about grief is wrong. So we created our first ever two-parter.
So stay tuned for part 2 next week on our usual drop day. And thanks for listening.
Toodles.